Hello class, my name is Mason Osborne, and today we'll be discussing Unreal versus Unity. Why is Unreal the better choice? To start things off, let's do a brief introduction to the two programs that we'll be talking about today. Unreal Engine, which original version was made by Epic Games in May 1988. Its current version, Unreal Engine 4, which is the one we'll be talking about today, was released in September 2014. Unity was released by Unity Technologies in June 2006 and has been updated regularly and is currently in Unity 5. Texts by Andrew Sanders and Alan Thorns are good reads to further understand how to use these programs to get into developing games. Both of them use example projects and walks people through these projects to understand how these programs and the elements of these programs fit into establishing what these programs do, these projects do, and how it all works together in achieving them. Andrew Sanders wrote an introduction to Unreal Engine 4, and Alan Thorns wrote Unity 5 by example. Other good reads that I suggest people look into would be online documentation by both of these companies. This is actually going to be online forums and listings of detailed listings of program elements by the companies to help further the understanding of these programs to the people using them, specifically for beginners, and even for people, and is then expanded by the community to help people grow by introducing them to new pieces of code and further understanding how these programs work. So, why Unreal? Why is Unreal better than Unity? Simply put, it's beginner friendly. Unreal Engine 4 does not require coding in order to jump into it, which means that it does not require the prerequisite that Unity has of knowing a programming language. Specifically, Unity needs to know a programming language called C#. But Unreal Engine 4 doesn't require programming in order to function, and doing so makes it a lot more versatile. But if you do know how to use coding, it is available in Unreal 4, making it all the better. But Unreal Engine 4 is able to avoid this coding requirement via the introduction of its blueprint system, now, which we'll talk about in a moment. Another reason, however, that Unreal is better than Unity is its intuitive UI. Now, let's talk about what is coding and blueprints. Coding is the use of a programming language to write a script. A script is essentially a line of text, not just a line, multiple lines of text used by a computer to determine chunks of data. This will be used by video games and these programs to turn these lines of text, which are used to determine inputs from players and other in-game events, into other events and actions provided by the game, which will eventually be used to summarize the gameplay of what will be the game. Now, how do blueprints work? Blueprints allows us to ignore coding, ignore the need of the programming language in order to use this game development program. Blueprints are a visual scripting system. Instead of writing text, you connect nodes. Let me bring up an example for you. This is the blueprint editor. This is where you make your changes to the blueprints in order to create cause and effect and other game elements and events within your game as you make it. So this right here is a node. This is the event begin play node, and this is just a random node I brought into the equation to simulate how these nodes work. So this event begin play node will trigger when the game begins play, as that will be the initial input to cause the blueprint system to work. As I press play, you will see that the program procedurally moves from this node to the next whenever the trigger is Doing so, this causes the chain reaction of cause and effect that we see whenever we play the games we know and love. Now, why does this make Unreal better than Unity? The better question to ask is, why does this make blueprints better than coding? And the real reason is because this makes the program more compatible, more accessible to beginners. And not just beginners to the game development process, but beginners to the construction of actual gameplay. So even individuals like artists and audio workers who have their own content made are able to switch gears and jump into making their games easier because the blueprint system allows them to circumvent the prerequisite of a programming language that you see within Unity. Further making blueprints and in turn Unreal better than Unity is its blueprint's ability to avoid and essentially troubleshoot errors due to its non-reliant nature on programming language. It doesn't require heavy amounts of syntax and semantics for the programming script to properly function. And instead, as we saw with the procedural motion between two nodes, we can actually see specifically when errors occur, as it won't be able to pass past the node that an error does occur at. Now, let's take a moment to look into the similarities that these two programs do share. As they are both game development programs, it makes sense that they would have the same tools to get about performing what they are meant to do, and that's making games. Now, before I do go into these, I have to ask the question, if more doesn't mean better, does that actually mean that less is better? Well, I have to disagree, especially when it comes down to the differences between Unreal and Unity. Before I start with the comparisons between both programs' UI elements, I want to briefly explain what the build is. The build is essentially the game as it is at the current time. It is the current version of the game prior to it being complete. So this right here is the default of Unreal when you just open it up. So it's kind of just the first build, the initial build. And from any time I reference the build beforehand, I'll be talking about items that'll be actually technically in the game and just are going to be affected by things like the blueprint or coding and are essentially just game elements already placed within the program to be translated into what we will see in the future as the game. Now, to go into the specifics of the comparison, the similarities between these two programs, and more accurately their UI, is actually three specific pieces. Well, four actually. There's the hierarchy system, item details, and then there's the file organization. And finally, there's actually the gameplay, the game setting options up here. Now, the first one is going to be the hierarchy. Now, this is essentially an organized view of everything that is currently within the build. These are all items that exist, especially even in Unreal's defaults, and are things that can be selected and chosen and focused on because they are currently in the build and achievable and can be focused upon because they're in the hierarchy, making them easier to find and such. This, however, for Unreal is called the World Outliner. In Unity, it is actually indeed called the hierarchy. It's the same thing in general, allows for individuals to quickly find objects within the game state or the build and interact with them as needed. The next section is actually just going to be the details option. This will be when you have an item selected, you'll be able to interact and alter the elements of the item itself, add things to the blueprints, like this one gives me the ability to quickly open up the blueprint menu and or create a blueprint if it doesn't already have blueprints applied to it. And this is just where all the components for this item will stockpile for us to be able to alter and change. Unity also has this. Unity also has this via the inspector. Selecting the item, you get to see all the components equipped to the block specifically for us to mess around with as we progressively make the game. The final piece is actually this part right here, the organization, the files of the game. The files of the game. And realistically, it's the same between both of them as well. Both are just organized files of assets and all that compiled into the same area, and they both have the ability to search through their files with the search bar and add and import things via at choice. Now, the final aspect is what really makes this the game creator that it really is, and that's the ability to alter objects within the build. So for this chair, there's the three transformation tools, as you might have seen beforehand. There's translation, which is the ability to move objects upon any of the axis, rotation, the ability to change the object's face, as well as scaling, the ability to change the size of the object, depending on an axis, of course. And this is, of course, translated between both programs, as well. Translation, rotation, and scale. From here, we can start going into the differences that the two programs do have in their UI. And let's start with this new section over here that Unreal has that Unity simply doesn't. And this is the ability to essentially drop in their basic assets given to you by default in the program itself. This section over here also allows us to switch between multiple modes that will also allow us to dynamically affect the build as it is, such as this landscape builder, which allows us to build the basic flooring and mapping for larger 3D scaled games, and foliage, which allows us to start building up, if we had some assets to work with, allows us to start building up abundances of foliage, plant life, and rocks, and scattered bushes, and things like that to fill up the spacings. Other than that, we also have the ability to edit geometry, as well as paint over these things, and just add new objects to the build that Unreal just doesn't allow us to do offhand like this. Such as here currently in Unreal, if we wanted to add another block to the situation, we would come over here to this menu, make sure that we have our basic items are just literally our basic objects menu open, and we can literally click and drag in a cube. Vice versa, in Unity, we have to figure out what, as Unreal would already have it in the open for people to to visually see right off the bat. Here in Unity, we have to explore our drop-down menus, going into a game object, 3D object, and then making a cube that way. Now, we actually have a cube. From this, we have the ability to augment this cube and then turn it into things that we use such as the landscaping and other stuff on that cube itself in general. Now, I do apologize, but it turns out that the recording software I use caps out at 15 minutes. So because of this, I'm going to be moving this over, the rest of this presentation, to the second part. At this time, if you can please open up the second part of this presentation and continue viewing from there, we can finish this up. Thank you for understanding.